Hi, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of the Dawn Jarvis Show. This is the show where I talk to and about leaders, professionals, and business owners about who they are, what they do, and why they do it. Today, my guest is Vonne Solis. Now, Vonne and I met on an online course, and we're now in a mastermind, which is absolutely lovely because it organically happened and we are very supportive to each other. And I'm delighted that she's here because we made a friendship in that, in that online, and we're still friends today, and we have quite a lot in common. So Vonne is an author, a life transformation coach, an online instructor, and a bereaved mum. She's also a wife, sister, and mum to one son who she adores. Vonne's mission is to help people heal from whatever loss or adversity they have experienced and find the life of their dreams in their own way and in their own time. Together, we're going to discuss that no matter what loss or adversity we suffer, we can change how we want to view our loss and the adversities that we've experienced in life and how we want to live our life. That while we are responsible for the challenges that we make in our life, Vonne really understands that the trauma, suffering, and the many roadblocks that make change hard for people who are bereaved. Vonne, it is so good to see you. We had a little chat before we started. How are you?
Well, I'm doing great, Dawn, and I thank you so much for having me on the show. Wonderful.
Absolute pleasure to have you on. I'm really looking forward to our chat. Now, Vonne is a bereaved mum, and usually I say, oh, how did you get to where you got to today? And while I was preparing for the show, I was thinking I can't really ask that. So what I am going to ask is how much of the impact of your bereavement had on your journey to how you got here today.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to share that I lost my daughter to suicide in July 2005 at the age of 22. And so that, and I was thinking this morning, well, how am I going to actually explain the context of this? Because it's true,
Mm-hmm.
you can't just sort of jump into bereavement and go, well, how are you? Well, it's been a real journey and I'm no longer the person I was. Well, who was that? So just to give you a little bit of context, who I was a very, I was thinking about how I would describe myself. And until my daughter's death, I was an adventure warrior. I was a person who was very curious, filled with adventure, had lots of adventures. Nothing stopped me. Whatever I wanted, I got. So, within that context, which I passed on to my children, I lived a very good life. I was a single mom until my daughter was 8. Then I married, not to her father, but to a different man, and he's the father of my son now, and we've been married 31 years in May. It's had its ups and downs, but I do want to throw that context in because he became a stepfather to my daughter. But by all accounts, our life was charmed. Okay, we were in the diplomatic corps for a while. We lived in different places. We traveled. Kids had it great. So you can imagine my absolute shock when my daughter took her life. So this is very important for me to speak about, and a large part of my work is centered on helping people understand, even though they don't like it, that trauma, tragedy, loss can happen to anybody in a heartbeat. Seriously, everybody
Mm-hmm.
is vulnerable to it, no matter how great your life is going, how wonderful you think your kids are doing, how successful everybody is. There are still some problems, and we're all absolutely vulnerable to a moment that can't be reversed.
Mm-hmm.
Having said that, it's not just about suicide, it's about all kinds of loss and trauma, as you said in the intro. So, when I became bereaved, and I'll keep this pretty short, all of those things are stripped away from me. I had nothing. Absolutely, I was a shell of an individual. And so I think basically, even though some of my foundation had been stripped away and I felt very lost, and the ground shook under my feet for a few years, which meant I just absolutely felt very unstable. I looked at the world largely through what felt like gauze. And um, but there were some things that happened, and I had a background in through all of this in spirituality, understanding, being a student of metaphysics, understanding there had to be more in the world. So I had always been sort of grounded in that and raised a Christian. I melded those two things together. So I had faith and I had trust that there was more. And we're not going to probably have time to talk a lot about that today, but a good part of my background has been in understanding ongoing consciousness, life after death. I worked in the angelic healing realm for a number of years from 2006 until basically 2015 when I had a collapse and I no longer could work one-on-one with people, but the angels still form a huge part of my life today.
Yes.
So it was within that context that I picked myself up pretty soon after Janaea died. Doesn't mean I was great. It just means I was determined to always move a step forward because I never wanted her loss to be a waste, ever. And I was going to do whatever it took to not let her choice to die ruin it for, it wasn't about me, it was more about preserving her memory, that she was not a mentally ill person. She was not a bad person.
Yeah.
She was not going to go to hell. You know, there are many, 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 many reasons. And I just didn't want her to be defined by that one moment. And therefore, that meant I had to look at that one moment differently.
Yeah.
Hence my journey nearly 17 years later.
Mm-hmm.
And so that takes a lot of work, Dawn. It's not so simple as saying, oh, look at your life differently. No, no,
No,
that's
it's
been the
not.
journey, the choice to not be stuck in suffering,
Yeah,
basically to honor her. Yeah.
I totally get that. Now, Vaughan and I have, we have something in common. I lost my sister, and she had breast cancer, and she died when she was very young. She died when she was 26, and we've had a lot of conversations, haven't we, Vaughan, about how that's impacted. I know I've spoken about how that's impacted on my family. You know, some of the choices I've made. You know, I got divorced a few years after my sister died. It's had an effect on my mother, particularly, obviously, which Vaughan understands, and you know, I've been quite concerned with her relationship with grief. And I suppose and in those conversations we've talked about sort of like it can be defining, it can be the lens that we live our life from. I think we've both known people or had periods where that has been the case, but you talk about that you know, that you can change your views on loss. You can you know, the adversity that brings, and you can, you know, realizing how it takes on our perspective, we can sort of change our view on things. And I just wondered if you wanted to expand on that.
Yeah, so it's a little I won't say complicated, but
Yeah, it's
there's
complicated though.
all right, it's complicated, but there's layers to it. And so one of the things that I'll sort of answer this in a couple parts.
Mm-hmm.
When I was first bereaved, and when I talk about early bereavement, there is no, in my opinion, um, you know, defined period of grief. Even though
Yeah.
I want to throw in here, because you might have some questions about this if you didn't know this.
Mm-hmm.
Prolonged grief disorder has just been entered into the DSM-5.
I did not know that.
Yes, and it was entered in, I believe it was this week or last week.
Wow, I
And
did
yeah,
not know that.
yeah, I figured you'd find that really interesting, and
Yeah,
maybe down the road you and I can have another conversation about some health
definitely.
issues and really help the bereaved, because more voices count. And you coming from the health background, me coming from the bereaved parent background, and you know, and you as you know, sibling, all of this combined, it gives us a really unique perspective on things. So I, of course, jumped on this. I found this out 2 days ago, and the reason I'm bringing it up right now is because further to this, there is a quote tips sheet, otherwise a checklist, that the American Psychiatric Association, I'm Canadian, so with due respect, this is the American Psychiatric Association, which puts the diagnostic scientific manual together and updates it for mental health professionals to rely on to diagnose, disorders and treat symptoms. And that I'm just saying for the audience. You could expand on that if you want, but that's essentially it. And I used the DSM to diagnose myself with post-traumatic stress disorder way back in 2007. And then a doctor confirmed it for me in 2014, a medical doctor. Yes. So at any rate, I've relied on this DSM and I look at changes. So anyway, so shock of all shock, what they have called complicated grief is now being termed prolonged grief disorder. And you can go to a link at the American Psychiatric Association and check the symptoms and find out if you think you have it. And largely it's if you've experienced intense grief over a loss, you pine for that person, like long for that person. But here's the kicker, that you aren't fully recovered basically in 1 year. So in other words, if you are still impacted 1 year later by that loss, you very likely have this disorder. So why that's important is because putting a time frame on bereavement, grief, well, we're always bereaved, but the grieving period, right, we should recover from. And so when we talk about healing and what makes us heal and how fast it takes, and does it even last? What is the healing? What do you expect from the healing? All this sort of stuff. When I was first bereaved, going back to that, which for me, I'm going to say was pretty traumatic for the first 10 years.
Yeah.
10 years. And another little quick point, I also discovered that when you're diagnosed with PTSD, a lot of the symptoms don't even start showing for PTSD until around 10 years. Wow. Very, very interesting. And I was diagnosed at 9 years. At any rate, so I would sometimes, when I could return back to TV, watching a little bit of TV, because everything slipped away from me. I used to play the piano. I stopped playing the piano. I stopped listening to music. I just basically stopped life until I felt strong enough to take another little step, another little step, another little step. But many things that I had done in my past life, my former life as a mom of 2 living children, they never returned. I never wanted to entertain again. I lost a lot of friends because I had been that powerhouse for them, and they didn't really understand this, Vonne. And so they kind of bailed on me, and I don't hold that against them. I get it. And so it's taken a really long time. And quite frankly, I'm still finding parts of myself, because if you can't return to who you were, you have to create something new, which is a lot of what my work is based in, helping people do that. So, but anyway, I would watch some talk shows sometimes, and the very rare occasion, like Oprah or somebody would have a person on who had lost all their children, or something really horrific had happened related to loss, and like a murdered child, say, at any age. And the parent would come on, bless them, like absolutely, well, I'm not going to say fine, but I am going to say appearances would indicate that they were fine. And the key for all of them, the key, it's not a strategy, go-to was their faith. Okay. It was they always talked about faith. And so you have to have some faith in something. And while we would categorize or think of faith mostly as related to something religious, I've come to understand that faith can be just about anything, as long as you've got your pulse on something better than today. That to me is faith. So I always had this in the beginning. I found a little tiny white light, but I'll tell you the truth, a lot of, in those early years, what really pulled me through was not only choosing to be on the planet for my daughter's memory and all I talked about, but also for my son. He was 13. I wasn't going to bail on him, even though I wanted to. And I got into working with angels back in 2006. And they formed, I certified under a then well-known woman that was teaching around the globe. And it turned out I was pretty good at it. And that was basically relying again on my background, raised as a Christian. So not having a problem believing in a higher force, call it God, call it whatever.
Mhm.
That, and then feeling I could actually communicate in a realm that felt safe and pure and loving and gave me answers that I couldn't find elsewhere. That played a significant role in me being able to continually move forward. And and then it's just sort of graduated into bigger and more expanded consciousness type thinking. So viewing the loss differently has to come from a deep, deep place where we understand what we need to understand about that loss, which is different for everybody,
Yeah.
in a way that can help us change our life and go, you know what, I don't want to be stuck in this place. I want to shoot for that place over there, no matter how long it takes me. And in my case, it's not living with pain.
Yeah.
Because I
I,
don't think that we need to be on the planet living with pain. You see, that's a very, very deep, deep belief I have. And some would say I've taken, like, myself included, a goal that is a little too worthy of me achieving, which would be living absolutely pain free from the loss of my daughter. But having that as the goal is what allows me to search, to change my thinking, to adapt my life, to figure out who I want to be. Because at the end of the line, Dawn, it's that I sure don't want to get to my deathbed, if I'm lucky enough to have a death that would occur, elderly and
yeah,
ready to leave
natural
the planet.
causes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
natural. Well, I don't want to sit there and go, boy, did I waste that life.
No. I thank you for sharing that, Vonne. It's a very thoughtful perspective in, I guess, how you manage grief. And there's a few things I wanted to say. Firstly, that it's a recognized, we now have recognition for it as a thing, I guess. And also, and what you said about the timeline is quite interesting. So when you said a year, I thought, wow, that's not a long time, really, particularly if the manner of the bereavement is traumatic,
Yep.
and sort of the relationship with PTSD as well. And I
Yeah.
think it's, I asked you about how it impacts on your perspective. So what I really like is that you said, you talked about, so some people get their strength. I'm struggling for the right words, from their faith or something they fix on. I know my mother got her coping strategies was definitely her faith. I think mine, as I pushed myself into my work, and I'm not sure, and we've talked about this before, whether that was a sort of maladaptive coping mechanism, but it's about sort of like, what do you sort of hang your, I suppose, how do you get through the day? What strategies do you need so that you can move forward and not be stuck? And I think you did use the word stuck in a place of pain, I guess.
Yep.
So
Yes.
I really like that explanation about, and I don't think that discounts from, people need support with that. People need to sort of like have people that understand that it can impact, and sort of, you talked about the length of time, and it can affect your relationships, and it can affect your work, and it can affect your children, it can affect all sorts of things. I think you touched on all of that, but it's sort of like, it's a journey, isn't it, really, about, this terrible thing has happened from your perspective, and that could be any kind of loss, really, and then how do you sort of manage it and sort of able to be, and thank you for that.
Yeah. I did want to just add to that, though, too, based on what you're sort of saying, Dawn, is that people really need to understand. And so there's no rule book. Sure, there's a
Yeah.
few books on grief and things like that, and that's fine. There shouldn't be a rule book. But the other thing is, when you just mentioned about getting through every day, so there's the bigger journey, okay, and lumps of time, could be months, years, and go, wow. look at all the strides I made. And I'm speaking in general terms, but I really encourage anyone that suffered anything really traumatic, look at where you are today and see how far you've come. Because one of the things that can leave us is the recognition for our achievements. And there's a whole bunch of reasons in that, for that, in my view. But for a bereaved parent, wow, the responsibility and guilt we feel for our child's death in almost every single case. Um, you'll find any number of parents, even when their child dies from natural causes, blaming themselves. And suicide is just a bit of a double whammy because it's just a horrible, horrible feeling when you know your child, no matter everything you've done that you think is being right, still chose to leave the planet. And it's not enough for me to have the world, medical professionals and otherwise, just go, well, they were mentally ill. And that is why I basically shy away from all of that, because, well, you didn't tell me that before, so why tell me that now? So this is and there's not a lot of postvention. This is a word I saw on a support group I've just actually it's actually a suicide awareness organization and support, but they talk for people who are at risk of suicide, but they talk about postvention and follow up. And I really love that because I hadn't heard that expression before. So, but when you bring it down under the microscope and you look at a daily life of a severely bereaved person, my term, there's not an actual term, severely bereaved, but I kind of think about it like that. So it could be anybody. You look at that, it's a daily struggle, Dawn. And just some days are easier than others. So if, for example, we make the goal, the overall goal, to feel more joy and to feel more fulfilled in our life, no matter what has happened, you're going to beat this thing, no matter what has happened. Well, then every day gets to be a new opportunity in how we want to view whatever happens during the day, how we want to think, act, and behave essentially with ourselves and with others. And that is essentially what drives me every single day. And that forms the bigger journey. So I do think a lot of it is about our thoughts and what we're going to choose to think and what we're going to choose to believe about what's happened, who we are, what we do, what we're worth, what we can have in our future. Like, these things are all very, very important, but it gets very muddled for probably several years until that becomes very clear and we start to heal on a very authentic level. And the reason that's important is because I just want to bring up very briefly here people who overwork. You did it, I did it for many years. A lot of bereaved parents find a cause, a passion. They change laws, they start organizations, they write books like I did, and you're just so busy. There's no time to look within at that real pain. And my collapse forced me to do that, to sort of ground myself in the physical experience of it, get my head solely out of the metaphysical realm where it was safe and warm and comfortable and everything made sense, to the physical grueling pain and suffering, which was the PTSD, the actual heart, broken heart, all of those things, and deal with it through therapy and books on trauma and different things like that. And basically, I did that for about 2 to 3 years, from about 2015 to 2018. And at the end of the 3 years, I was like, okay, I felt that. I need to integrate the two worlds. So I'm going to honor that pain. I'm going to understand that I live with that. I may never get over it. So I do give myself permission to live with pain. Very, very huge, because a lot of people, don't give themselves permission to feel what they're really feeling and integrate it into, I feel this at my core, but I want this. I want the joy. I want the beautiful, fulfilling life, to not rob myself or my family or others of who I really am at my core, which is a worthy, loving being who did not do anything wrong to make her child want to leave. So you can see that's packed with tons and tons and tons of components, many,
Yeah.
many, many, many things. But that's
Yes.
the very overhead of it all that drives me, and it can be broken down into many, many different bits and pieces. You can work in it on the physical, you can move it into the metaphysical and the spiritual understanding and expanded consciousness, where, as you talked at the very beginning, responsibility for our healing, and I'll add owning the truth of what has happened to us, play key roles in helping us expand our consciousness.
I want to touch very briefly about that sort of like personal responsibility versus all the things that are happening to you. And I think, I talked about being stuck, and I talked about, you've talked about feeling responsible for your daughter's death. Sort of like, how can you balance all of that so that it doesn't overwhelm you?
Well, how I did it, you know, um, I found that, so it's a little complicated to answer. So anyway, I couldn't. Bottom line is I couldn't, and I was at war with myself until, well, for years. And it's really only been the last couple where I put a stop to it, and I just said, wait a minute here, look, time is a passing, and you're missing out on some stuff. And what do you really want to do? But I'll throw in here loss of identity and all of these other very painful things associated with really, really difficult bereavement, kind of make it hard for us to understand what we want. And even if you do think that you're really worth it all, it can be very hard to get a clear roadmap for the future. And then you have a clear roadmap, and then maybe you don't have the health to achieve these goals, and it goes on and on and on and on. So that's why it's a daily journey, actually. But it is essentially looking at life, like taking, I kind of think I forgot your question. What was your question, Dawn? Sorry.
About personal responsibility
Oh yeah.
versus,
Yeah.
how do you manage sort of that? I
Yeah.
suppose we're a very society, sort of like, I suppose, Northern Hemisphere societies. I'm like, you can do this, you can change everything, blah blah blah. But when you're not feeling great,
Right.
and you've had some bad things happen to
Yeah.
you, that
Yeah.
that changes things, and then you can
Yeah.
either turn that in on yourself, or
Right.
use it to motivate yourself, or do nothing. So I was just thinking about, you started talking about how you did it or did do it.
Yeah. So, and I said I didn't by myself.
Mhm.
And so this is where my foundation in metaphysics and spiritual training, many years ago, before my daughter was born in my mid-20s, I joined the Unity Church. So it gave me a beautiful blend of I don't know if it's global or not, but anyway, it gave me a beautiful blend of the Christian, but the personal power in our faith and things like that. And so I relied on that. And so when we talk about, I had to go back to those roots that were my spiritual, my expanded consciousness. No, there has to be more. There has to be more. I couldn't live just solely as a human being, because I don't think we're actually really equipped to handle a lot of our suffering. And so, whether a person finds this through traditional religion, defines spirituality as traditional faith through religion, or a little bit more, where we become personally responsible, we have personal power to create things in our life, to live a good life, and we do it in tandem with higher forces. That's the best way I can say it without sounding too spooky and woo-woo. So essentially, for me and a lot of my work, when I take it out of just the physical work I do, which some of that work I keep it just down in the physical pain and the physical, here's what we can do, here's what to look out for, here's what you in the physical. But when I move it into a little bit more personal responsibility, well, then what we're looking at is choice to be on the planet. We're looking at soul contracts. We're looking at, you know, creating our experiences, sometimes co-creating our experiences. We're looking at it, what are the lessons from all of that? And if the goal is to be as consciously expanded as possible during this one little lifetime that might be part of many more and a larger soul experience. Well, that gives us a ton of material to work with and tools. And it's never ending because probably nobody will ever fully achieve that in this one lifetime. But it can be fun, it can be rewarding, and it can become very, very, spiritually fulfilling to feel like you're not alone in this planet and there are bigger things to look at. And what's my responsibility? You talked a little bit when we last talked about your responsibility, what you could do, what you want to do, what you were meant to do, possibly even as a result of your sister's um, passing. So, in my opinion, the end of human life, when we least expect it, and we certainly don't want it, provides us with some of our most poignant and powerful lessons if we choose to pursue them. And sometimes that means getting out of our own little minds, you know?
Love that, Vonne. Thank you so much for that. Now, Vonne is a prolific author, and I wanted you to tell us a little bit about your books and why our audience might find them useful.
Sure, Dawn, thanks. So, the first book I wrote, I've written 3 books and we'll be writing a fourth. It's called Divine Healing, Transforming Pain into Personal Power. And it basically does 2 things. The first part actually tells my story of the moment I learned of Janae's suicide. And through 12 chapters, takes readers through that journey of shocking loss, uh, being thrust into a world of grief that I knew nothing about, all of the frustrations I had with it, dealing with things right down to basically what do you do when you really don't have money for a funeral, to how I was treated in grief support, just all of the things I want to see change. So that was a very early start in me wanting to be an advocate for change in how we view and understand grief and support the bereaved. And in part 2 of that book, there is a self-help healing practice based pretty much on just what I was talking about in this podcast to help anybody bereaved. The second book I wrote is called The Power of Change, and it basically, again, just jumps on that, again, the metaphysical, spiritual principles, actually what I call chi wisdoms, based on energy and us being energy. And so I had a little fun with that and provide 30 days to change your life based on these chi wisdoms. And my latest book I published last year is called Lessons in Surviving Suicide, a letter to my daughter. And that was a very cathartic look. So when you asked me earlier in dealing with this pain, one of the things I did start to do was journal these feelings to my daughter in 2018. And that, about all the things that I felt were keeping me stuck as a result of her not being here anymore. And that ultimately turned into this book. And it is essentially a guide, a comfort, and a bit of a compass for newly bereaved parents who have lost their child to suicide, or parents who are struggling with, well, let's call it prolonged grief disorder, otherwise known as complicated grief. So it helps those parents, guides them through some of the things to watch out for, what could happen, what may be happening, some tips, and basically lessons learned from my journey looking back to 2005 to today.
Thank you so much. And
Yeah.
links to those books will be in the show notes, and I'll also researched prolonged grief disorder and link that in the show notes. So Vonne, I know that you've got a course as well that you've developed alongside of your work. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so I just opened an online school and I have one course available at the moment, and that is to give very structured steps to anyone bereaved or coming from bereavement not related to human loss, grief not related to human loss. We don't probably have time to talk about that. We spoke about that in other settings a little bit, and you've probably talked about it elsewhere, but grief is related to many, many losses where it's impacted you profoundly. And that course is designed through a step-by-step 13-lesson process to help people start getting unstuck and creating what they really want for their life, even the life of their dreams, if they can dream. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And Vonne has kindly provided a special offer, which it's 30% off if you decide to access that course. And again, the details will be in the show notes. So Vonne, this is a tough subject matter. It's not easy. And in one of the things I do in my podcast, I ask a couple of questions about health and well-being and how you stay focused, positive and productive. So, you know, this must take a lot out of you. So how do you stay, focused, positive and productive, firstly?
Yes. Thank you for asking, Dawn. Great question. It is very hard. I think personality plays into how we move forward somewhat. And I'm a fairly positive, optimistic person by nature. I discovered that. I actually didn't know that, but my daughter's death helped me really discover that. So again, going back to the daily thing, I just make a decision. Honestly, I make a decision. I push myself sometimes too hard. I feel very frustrated when I have to recognize I can't work at the speed I want to or other people do. I can't maybe produce as much. So it's very frustrating. And I will be honest, I'm only now learning to say that's okay. You can still make it the way you need to make it in the world, doing what you do in the time frame you do it, which is at the core of my teaching. So the teacher learns what she teaches, right? And I have to remind myself every day, though. As far as staying motivated, I do everything I do. I think really for my daughter.
Yeah.
I would love to say I do it for me, but I'm not sure I'd be doing any of this if she hadn't passed away,
Yeah.
you know? Yeah.
I
So I
think
do it for her.
I think that is fair enough, actually, in terms of drive, in terms of mission and vision. And what I see, I know you very well, is that you're using that experience to help others. And I really get what you're saying, that if your daughter had not died, you wouldn't have gone down this path. That wouldn't have been something you would have thought about. There may have been something else, but that this is, your circumstances have sort of like put and placed you on this road, and it's sort of like making the most of it. And then sort of the impact that has on your health and well-being, though. So how do you manage that? Because again, it's one thing about being motivated. You've got a cause, you're driven, it's like you've got a purpose, but the impact that has on your every day-to-day life must be a lot. So this podcast, and sort of like one of my interests, being a nurse, is that you you embody it, really. You are a creator, you are a business owner, you are you're mission driven, and that those kind of people, A-type personalities, for want of a better expression,
Yeah.
that they were in that mission and vision. They don't really think about, oh yeah, have I drunk enough today, or have I got enough sleep, or so how do you manage that? Because you're well aware of the impact of grief on your health and well-being, but what about the impact on yourself, actually talking about all of that?
Great question, Dawn. One of the things I learned, I did about 3 years of cognitive therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And while that's good for some things, it helped me in some ways. But one of the big takeaways I had from that was finding relief. And I hadn't really thought about relief in my life before. So since about 2014, in there, 2015, I've made a lot of decisions based on what's going to bring me the greatest amount of relief. I am a non-interventionist person, which means I absolutely do not like, any drugs or anything like that. So I manage my health really, really well. I have had struggles, not going to lie. I've had struggles from PTSD with chronic illness, but they're not of a serious nature, just the kind that flu bug throw you in bed for, a few days, And those have served, it's taken years, but those have finally started to serve as the wake-up call for fatigue.
Mhm.
And so I watch things that could aggravate me, because there's a huge correlation, and I'm sure you're in agreement with this, with mental health and physical health.
Absolutely.
And so if the mental health is out, then our bodies are going to show us that something's not right. And so I just have really learned to listen to my body, and I just know the signals, and when enough's enough. And here's what I found for those people that are the audience here, is that when you trust your body enough, and then you have to go into a slow mode, you know what? You don't miss out on anything. It comes back. And even though there might be a fear that this is it, I'm never going to get my motivation back, or, I'll never have energy again. These times, at least in my case, they do pass. And one day I just like, oh, it's back. And sometimes with, more creativity, it's like the channels are clearing, the blockages are it's like pressing a reset. It's not even blockages, it's just pressing that reset, and we all need a reset. And there's nothing wrong with slowing down, people, and admitting we need to slow down sometimes, because life will be there for us. I mean, now obviously when you're looking after young children and you're having to go off to work and do these things that are not really our passion. I had to do that for years. I no longer have to do that. I haven't had to do that for a number of years now. But that impacts us also in ways that are not good for us. And as a result of me doing that for a number of years, Dawn, I obviously couldn't manage it, because I had to go on a disability for over 2 years. And I never returned to what was then my day job. And because I didn't at that time have the stamina, the motivation, even the clarity to start a business, I chose to work for an employer, which involved a commute. And
Mhm.
even though I would constantly be creating on a yearly basis new accommodations, right down to eventually working 4 days at home, when I got to the point that Thursday at 4:15 shut down, I was just already stressed for having to get out of bed Monday and go down to my office.
Mhm. Yes.
Yeah, I knew I was in trouble. And
Mhm.
so having the courage to claim what we need for ourselves, that brings us relief, that brings us our healing, that brings us a calmer environment. I can assure you, when you have faith in more than just yourself, everything always turns out.
Love that. Thank you so much for that. And this has been a fantastic conversation. How do people get hold of Yvonne if they want to sort of like go deeper with you? We're putting the books in the show notes, in the course,
Yeah.
in the show notes. But if people want to get in contact with you, how would they do that?
Yeah, basically, if they just go to my website, vonnesolis.com, I've got all the resources and support there for the moment. As you know, I'm starting a podcast in May, so I'm going to be going live a little bit more, where people can follow some of my teachings through that. Yeah, they can contact me. There's a contact page there if they want to get in touch for any kind of coaching, or I do select coaching. And I'm just trying to reach more people through the online work. But everything is there on vonnesolis.com.
Brilliant. And Vonne is also on LinkedIn if you want to connect with her there. This has been
Yeah.
amazing. It's been deep, it's been serious, but there's also joy and hope in all of it as well. We have a
Yeah.
fantastic relationship, and I know we'll be talking more soon. And
Yes.
I hope that it's been of benefit. In fact, I know it's been of benefit to the audience. How I usually end is I sort of like give it over to the guest and say, is there one tip or nugget that our listeners, that if something's resonating, that they can act on today? Is there anything that you'd like to share with the audience from?
Yeah. Basically, a lot of my work is in how I've termed it for many years, called personal power.
Yeah.
And I'll end with this, and for the audience that believes, you're going to be really, really comforted. For those that don't, I'm not here to convince or change anyone's mind. My daughter
Perfect.
visited me for years
Mhm.
from beyond. She taught me so much of what's in divine healing. She visits me today, not to the same degree, but it brought me such a great comfort. And I understood the power we actually really do have, the personal power we really do have, which is heart centered, comes from our heart. Anybody can change their life from any circumstance with the right tools and the right mindset. And you just have to know how to do it, have a little guidance, and trust yourself that you'll always find your right teacher, you'll always find the right tools and how to use them. But it starts with understanding your own power within. I also want to thank you, Dawn.
Oh, thank
I am so grateful you're in my life. I really
oh,
am. And
thank you.
yeah, I just really am. And thank you for this opportunity also to showcase my work a little bit. And I just really want to shine a light on everything you do as well. And thank you for that as well.
Oh, thanks. That's amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here, Vonne. And that's it for the Dawn Jarvis show today. I hope it's been as useful to you as it has been to me. Like, share, subscribe, share the love. I'm sharing the love. We're doing some on Friday, sharing the love. It's the weekend. Let's share the love. And I will see you soon. Take care,
All
everybody.
right.
Bye-bye.